right. It is September 16th, Wednesday, September 16th at 7 p.m. This is the regular business meeting for District 96 School Board. Kathy, can you call the roll?
Mr. Barsadi?
Present.
Mr. Miller?
Here.
Mrs. Kleiber?
Here.
Mr. Marhol?
Here.
Mrs. Murphy?
Here.
Mr. Muirhead?
Here.
And Mr. Hunt?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Okay, at this time, is there any public comment?
I'm going to double check, but I do not believe so. There is none.
Okay. Then are there any proposed changes to the agenda? Okay, then the next item on the agenda is the superintendent's report.
All right, thanks, Dan. So it is September 16th. Our last meeting was September 2nd, as you all know, which was a committee of the whole and was also on our very first day of school. So I wanted to take a few minutes and just provide a bit of an update on the school reopening and this kind of being our first official board meeting now that we are back in session. I do want to make just a side comment that we do not have student presenters coming tonight. We talked about creating a plan for student presenters to present virtually somehow. And that feels challenging right now with everything else we have going on. So I think for now we'll have student presenters on hold. And I think our principals appreciate that. And perhaps our families and students do too. So we'll stay tuned, but we do not have one this month and we don't anticipate one for the next month. And we'll kind of see where things go after that. I did just want to share, I know this is information that the board is already quite familiar with, just an overall update. You have an overall update on our enrollment report. I know that's typically an interesting report at the beginning of the year. We did try to create the hybrid remote details for everybody, for the community to see, for the Board of Education certainly to take a look at. Really, as our survey results came out, and it holds true now that we have 70% of our students here for in-person learning, our hybrid in-person learning options, and then we have 30% of our students on a remote learning schedule at this point. We have offered to families that at the trimester, we will be reaching out probably sometime in October to kind of reassess if families want to stay with the hybrid plan or stay with the remote plan or make a switch. It's already something we talked about in our leadership team today. That is, when are we going to, resort when the time comes, certainly. I also want to share with all of you, and I know the board is already aware and the community is already aware, that we have had 3 cases of COVID-19 identified, one at Ames School, one at Hollywood, and one at Central. As my letter to the community and to the Board of Education and to our staff shared, these are all student cases and do appear to be completely separate and unrelated one from the other. I know some parents have also asked me to better understand how many students are in quarantine. And quarantine can come up because there are children that present, or staff members that present symptoms that could be consistent with COVID. And until there's an alternative diagnosis, we have to make an assumption that it could be. But we also have students and staff members that have been quarantined really with that abundance of caution, with this idea of, were they possibly within that 6-foot parameter for more than 15 minutes. And so we have, I think right now, estimated, and this is a number that changes really daily, about 47 students in quarantine and about 10 staff members. So I wanted, again, just to update both the board and the community on that. We are, certainly very confident in our protocols and our procedures around social distancing and mask wearing and hand washing and our cleaning procedures. I will tell you, just to share with the board and with the community, that children are really good at this. When I'm watching children in the classrooms, from our youngest early learners through middle school, children understand the importance of mask wearing and the importance and value of social distancing. So that part of things is going well. Our morning and afternoon entry procedures are going well. I know many of you are parents. You've probably seen our staff out there taking temperatures in the morning and again at the afternoon start time. And again, that seems to be going really smoothly. Our remote teachers and our remote learning students, I think that Angela observed last time when she talked to you that you would walk by a classroom of teachers teaching remotely and they're so animated you wouldn't realize that they don't have a group of children sitting physically in front of them, but they are in front of them on the Zoom camera. And so that's great to see. Overall, really the The educational, the student learning part of our reopening has been really smooth, feels very typical in many ways. The principals have talked about when you walk by the classrooms, you hear children talking about their letters, their numbers, narrative writing, whatever it may be. The buildings do feel quieter overall, which is something I know even children have commented on. I would tell you some of the good things. I know, again, principals have shared that, again, watching a classroom discussion, it was unclear who was at home and who was physically in the classroom, that really all students were engaged in participating in a teacher-led conversation, which again is what we want to see. We're seeing really nice things happening outdoors with our outdoor games and outdoor learning opportunities. So in many ways, things feel somewhat normal. I will tell you though, in our leadership team meeting today, we took a long time just even talking about school picture day, the use of the library, some things that you just kind of take for granted how typical and easy they might be, and there are unique challenges in making sure that we have social distancing and mask wearing. And do you take your school picture with your mask on or your mask off? And does that require us to take school pictures outside? So these are all the things that we are working through as we kind of charge forward with an unusual school year, but every reason to believe a very successful school year. So I wanted to share that with all of you. I don't know if there are particular comments or questions about the start of the school year. I know some of you are experiencing it firsthand with your own children. Any other thoughts or comments about all that?
I just wanted to make a quick comment about the COVID cases that you mentioned. I think that there's a perception, maybe some people might have the perception that having 3 cases in a 2-week period is somehow unexpected or unusual. But I don't think that's quite right. If you look at the prevalence of the disease in the U.S. or in Illinois or Cook County, around 1.5 or 2 people per 1,000 in the last 2 weeks have tested positive for COVID. So that's, say we take the Cook County number, which is 1.7, the U.S. number is 1.6, and the state number is about 2. So it's 1 or 2 people per 1,000. So just, as an order of magnitude, without sort of getting too precise with the numbers, if you have 1,000 people and the rate is a couple people per 1,000, you would expect that you're going to have 1 or 2 people on average in that group of 1,000. So we have 1,200 kids in the hybrid system right now. So just based on that, you'd expect to see, something, assuming those numbers are ballpark right for children, and it's hard to get the precise data for younger people, but just ballpark, again, you'd expect to have a couple people. And of course, you never see the exact average whenever you sample. There's some variation around that. And so if you think about the sort of confidence window around that too, you'd expect a number between like 0 and 5. So in any 2-week period, if you see 0 to 5 cases, you shouldn't be surprised, because these people are living in the community. The question is not, oh my God, there's 3 cases you observe. The real question is, are the protocols we've put into place adequate to prevent transmission in the schools? And I think, based on all the work that Martha and the administrators and the teachers have done, I think that it seems to me very likely that they will be sufficient, and we will not have transmission. But obviously, it's something we need to monitor. But I just want to address the point that some people think it might be unusual we should have 3 cases. And I would say it's not unusual. In fact, it's expected with the rates that we see, in the country, in the county, in the state. So that's the only comment I want to make about that.
Are there other comments about the school reopening?
Yeah, from my perspective, I think it's gone pretty good. I'll echo everything Jeff said and just kind of tack onto that really, it's not, our plan wasn't to prevent spread in the community, it was prevent further spread because of the school system. And so far, none of the other students have tested positive that we know, although it might be a little too soon, but seeing as how we followed the protocol and the studies and everything have continued to show that, you know, mask wearing, hand washing, social distancing all work, and then collectively they work even more, it does seem like we've got the right protocols in place and everything. So I also am not concerned, like I'm hearing Jeff say too. It's unfortunate that it happened so quickly, but at the same time, I kind of look at it as at least we got it out of the way, I guess, early, and we can figure out where the gaps in our plan are and then fill those gaps. And I know a lot of the feedback that I've gotten really was, you know, case number one, you know, what do we do? And so there's still a lot of misinformation out there, I think, and people, just from what you hear, what you see, I mean, even just the media sometimes, you know, contradicts themselves and everything. So I've been doing as much as I can to keep myself educated on the actual facts in the medical fields and trying to pay attention to the medical experts and everything. So it's disappointing that we had 3 already so quickly, but it does seem like our protocols are working. So I think the only other thing I would add is I would just really reach out to, you know, I don't know how many people are watching tonight or might watch this later, but there have been, I have been involved in conversations with and seen things put in writing and talked to people that have really been, this might sound a little bit extreme, but pretty much harassed and attacked after saying that they have actually contracted this, which I think is interesting. It doesn't really help anything to harass people and make them, you know, put a scarlet letter on them and really kind of isolate them in society. It's not really a practice that's going to encourage others to come forward when that is exactly what we need them to do. So I just kind of ask folks to be a little bit level-headed and respectful of your neighbors, your friends, things like that, not really, you know, try to go out there and attack or shame people for this. You know, who knows how people got it, and I know there's a lot of different opinions and everything, but just a little bit of civility here would really go a long way. So that's all I have to say.
I guess the only comment I would make is that unless we are testing our school population at a higher rate, we actually don't know the number of cases that we have because of asymptomatic transmission. So I think it's great that we only have 3 known cases. However, we won't know because none of these children are being tested. None of the teachers are being tested. So I know we're going to be talking about testing in the future, but I don't think we can say with any certainty that protocols are working yet until we know who has what. And children are not always eligible for testing if they don't have symptoms. So I think this is going to be an issue for our community until we know how we're going to assess that. So.
I do have information about the testing. One testing idea that I do want the board to be aware of, and we'll talk about that next. I'll kind of flip-flop just the items on the superintendent's report here. But I do just want to echo what Wesley said about parents needing to come forward and share this information, as challenging as that might be, that we are very appreciative of parents that have called us, and I know those have been hard calls for them to make, but we needed to know. It's helpful for us to know. It actually enhances our safety and our practices for everybody. So, right, we don't want this to be a deterrent that parents somehow feel like they shouldn't share this information.
Yeah, no.
Seriously?
No, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, I mean, no, I agree with, what you just, this is a community thing. We shouldn't be shaming no one. I mean, this is not easy. It's like if you get sick, you get the chicken pox, you get the measles or what have you. No one wants to be sick, but you know, information is going to help us stop this and slow the spread. And so, I mean, we're all in this together. I mean, everyone, we haven't heard that, at least I haven't heard that term in a while, but we're all in this together, and we need to just pull together to do this, and there should not be any shaming if there's somebody comes down with it. So, I mean, the goal is to keep it out of the schools and keep the transmissions in the schools, but we are in this together. And so once people leave the school, I would even encourage people when they leave the schools and kids to continue to practice the protocols that we have here. I mean, I know that's difficult, and I've seen that on my own block, but I mean, people need to adhere to this, and that's how we're going to get this under control. And then eventually get us back to school that we used to know in 2019.
Right. Any other comments about School reopening?
I would just like to say, as a parent of a new kindergartner and a new early learner, I mean, having the hybrid option and having the kids be able to go to school has just been a godsend. It's been amazing. It's been wonderful to see the kids, how excited they are to go to school every day, how excited, you know, just how much energy they bring after they've been at school for the day, the stories that they can tell, the people they've interacted with. It's truly great that we have this option for our kids. It's absolutely doing them good, and I can see that on a daily basis. You know, there was one example just yesterday when, you know, Dad got left in charge of supervising the afternoon Zoom session. You know, it must have been an emergency, but yeah. So at one point, you know, I saw my son had the iPad propped in front of him, and the art teacher was saying, yeah, Harrison, I can't hear you, and he kept saying louder, I don't know what to do. So, you know, it was a simple matter of he needed to press mute, but just still thinking like, okay, and I'm trying to run a meeting and I'm doing this, and
Right.
it's like it just really pretty quickly encapsulated how difficult it can become very quickly in a remote-only fashion. And my hat's off to the families who've made that choice and are making it work. But I definitely am very grateful that we have this hybrid option, and I look forward to continuing it as long as we can.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything Dan just said, and I think we just have to remind ourselves periodically why we are offering this. Obviously, there's a trade-off. The safest option would be everyone stays home and no one comes into school, but the trade-off there is that it's very, very hard, especially with younger children, to give them a proper education, and we can't afford to let an entire generation of children have a substandard education. We just can't afford that. And so if we can do this in the way we're doing, carefully and as safely as possible, and make sure that the risks are minimized, monitor everything very carefully as we're doing, I think it's absolutely the right call. And I totally agree with what Dan's point. This is the right call for educating children.
Yeah, I would like to add though, I know my kids are the remote option only, but I do have to say that my kids do look forward actually. I mean, everyone's talking about looking forward to going to school. My kids actually do look forward to going to school. I mean, we've been fortunate enough that we set up their study areas, like their own little offices. But my hat's off to the teachers who are doing the remote, because they are excited. The junior high one, not so much all the time, but the youngest one always is there like 10 minutes
That's
earlier,
the age.
waiting for this class to start. So they are excited. I mean, so my hat's off to the teachers who especially are, to all the teachers, but to doing the ones remotely, because I know that is definitely proposes its own set of challenges.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, our teachers are, in the course of 3-4 months, have learned to put all of their content in a remote way, for whether it's Seesaw for the little ones or videos or whatever they're accessing. And I think, you know, I only have one teacher, obviously, for my daughter, but she's doing an amazing job managing all of these new perspectives and trying to care about each student. So I know that's it's really hard. Having been a teacher, it's really hard as it is to pay attention to every student's needs, but then to add on a layer of complexity it's a challenge. Yeah.
Absolutely. All your points make so much sense, and I appreciate your sharing them. I do want to talk a little about this idea of COVID-19 testing. So we had talked about this very briefly a couple meetings ago about District 102, which is one of our neighboring districts, is offering a COVID-19 testing program within the district, and they have reached out to us if we are interested in a possible partnership. So, you know, I want to certainly thank District 102. I think it's a really gracious offering. I'm sharing this as a piece of information for there to be some board discussion. I'm not coming to you with a recommendation or a proposal at this point in time, because I think there are significant complexities to deciding to engage in something like this. On the face of it, I think it sounds like a great idea. We would have more surveillance. We would have a better understanding of, you know, kind of to Sherry's point, any asymptomatic individuals or pre-symptomatic individuals possibly. So just to give you a little bit of background, District 102 is offering this, and it is PCR testing for any consenting student and consenting adult staff member of the district. And they are running they're running a lab in one of their school buildings. They have a science center, and they've set up an informal lab setting. It is not an FDA-approved lab. I mean, you're not walking into kind of a medical style. You're walking into a classroom. They have hired lab assistants from Loyola Medical Center. They are doing the saliva testing, but it does run through PCR machines. So it's not the antigen, it's the PCR testing. So there's materials and equipment. It's the materials that the students literally drool or spit into, and then it's the testing assay, and then it's running it through a machine to come up with a result. And so there's, again, lab costs, lab assistant costs, the materials costs. District 102, again, not looking to make any money on this, but looking to sort of meet the costs that they have, would estimate that it's about $11 per person per test if we were to engage with them in this possible partnership. Right now, District 102 is testing, like I said, every child who consents and every staff member who consents weekly. They have kind of a rotation. They don't do everybody on the same day. They sort of roll it out over the course of the week. The other option is that we could also consider sending symptomatic individuals to them for testing. Now, one of the challenges in this is that just the way, because they're not as they describe, not an FDA-approved laboratory, the results that they get that might be like COVID, they get a clinically significant finding that indicates that the person could have COVID. Now, they also get a result that says no clinically significant findings, not COVID, likely not COVID, and the student could return to school. Now, Jim and I ran kind of some quick numbers on this, and I think we quickly realized that we could be easily at about $15,000 a week to engage in this kind of testing. I also want to thank District 102. I mean, I've met with the superintendent there a few times, Dr. Kyle Schumacher, just a wonderful colleague, and really gracious to say certainly some of these neighboring districts that want to work with us, we're open to that. But I think there's a challenge. I think there's a challenge in the cost. There's a challenge in this idea that it's not a true COVID diagnostic, and we're also requiring a true COVID diagnostic test. So we would say to a staff member or student who might get that clinically significant finding, it's enough information for us that we would quarantine the person, right? We would say, we're going to assume this is COVID, and we're going to quarantine you in the way we would if we had that positive test result. They are then recommended to go and get a true COVID diagnostic testing, whether that's at a CVS, a Walgreens, a medical center. But with it looking like this idea, I think when we set out on this school reopening plan, that if we had comprehensive testing, it somehow felt that we were creating a safer environment. I think what we're already learning is families are communicating with us about COVID in their family situations. We have sent people out to go and get COVID testing, both staff and students. And what I'm sort of hearing anecdotally is that results are coming in more quickly, whereas I think people getting tested were waiting 5 and 7 days. I do know that we've had people getting a 24-hour result, and they're not going and paying for a quick test. They're actually getting their PCR diagnostic test back pretty quickly. So again, this is very anecdotal at this point in time, but I think there's really a unique sort of question, challenge in this idea that before we started school seemed to be critically important. And I think to kind of some of the points that were even being made just earlier this evening, this idea that our goal is to reduce any school transmission, to understand when there are cases, certainly, to reduce any school transmission. But again, if we're confident, and we will be very confident in another 5 to 10 days, having had some exposure in the school district, that our mask wearing, social distancing, hand hygiene, good cleaning procedures have worked. So I find this question now about the possible partnership and possible comprehensive testing plan to be more challenging than perhaps I thought it was when we first started looking at it as an interesting idea. So I'm curious just to get some board feedback. I didn't list this as a new business nor old business item because there's no vote, there's no decision making at this point in time. It's a piece of information, and again, just, appreciate District 102 even offering this as something to consider.
Yeah, thanks for looking into that, Martha. I'm curious, like, what has been the experience of District 102 so far? I mean, how many positive cases have they identified? How many of them have been asymptomatic they wouldn't have otherwise known? And what have they seen so far in the several weeks they've been actually running this?
Yeah, so anecdotally, they tested again all their consenting individuals before school started. It was the Saturday before school started or something. And I think they had 2 clinically significant findings out of probably thousands. I mean, so it's a larger school district than we are. I also know they ended up with a positive case in the district that did not come up on their surveillance testing because the child hadn't been, that grade level hadn't been tested yet. Like they would have found it probably 2 days later, but it's interesting that they got the report from the family before they were able to determine it themselves. And so that's I think, an important piece of information. Does it allow us to quarantine, to catch things early, to get children or staff members out of the school setting in a way that reduces transmission? And it's a question. I don't come to you with an answer on it.
What's their turnaround time on getting the results back? Do you know?
Quickly, probably about a half day. They were sharing that if we brought them we would be responsible for getting the sample and then basically taking a refrigerated sample, like in a cooler, over to LaGrange, which isn't that far. He said, I bet if you brought me something at the end of the school day, I could have something to you by 9 p.m. Yeah. It was kind of the timeline that we discussed. So that idea of having a pretty fast answer is appealing.
I think it is appealing. I'm a huge fan of the idea of testing. I think Sherry was absolutely right. Is that when we were talking earlier about confirmed cases, those are just confirmed cases, and we know that for every confirmed cases there are unconfirmed cases where people are asymptomatic. So I think the idea of testing is a great. I mean, once a week, I don't know if that's quite enough because there's the period of, apparently the period during which you're really infectious is a 5-day period. So maybe once a week is not optimal. But if you think about the cost, you said $15,000 a week if we test all the students that are coming in and all the staff. Over the course of 30 weeks, that would be, $500,000. Now, it's a lot of money, but at the same time, we think nothing of spending, I would choose another word, actually, that much money on rearranging a parking lot in our small school, okay? So let's put things in perspective here. What's more important? The possibility of maybe catching a case early, which could prevent other infections, or, rearranging a parking lot. For me, it's very clear. So I would be in favor of pursuing that option, I think, after thinking about it, because I just think it's money better spent than many of the other things that we think about spending money on. And I think it could make a difference. I mean, I'm not saying it would, but there's a chance it could make a difference. So.
Can I ask a question, Martha?
Sure.
Are they pooling tests? Because I know saliva tests can be pooled for, you test a whole bunch at once, and if you get it positive, then you test more specifically. Do you know if that's happening per classroom?
Well, I know everybody's saliva goes into an individual container.
No, there is a strategy, rather than testing one at a time, that you test a group, and then if all of them are negative, great, you're done, and you don't need to specifically test anymore. So it's more of an efficiency issue. Do you know if that's happening?
I mean, I'm not sure I'm answering your question directly, so I don't know exactly how many tests are going in, but they do it by grade level. So I think it's like 6th through 8th grade is Tuesday, and I don't have the days correct, but so they don't wait to say, let's do a third of 6th graders and then see if we get positives or something.
No, I literally mean like the samples go together into one vial.
Yeah.
It's positive. And
Exactly. I understand if you're testing that grade, but are the actual samples
Yeah.
it's just a cheaper way.
it's cheaper and it's faster, because if you can throw out a whole group and say those are all negative, you don't have to specifically go back and
All this life.
yes, exactly. That would be something I'd be interested in knowing, and I totally agree with Dr. Miller. We spend $500,000 on asphalt, and these are people's lives, so I think it's a valuable thing to look into, and I'm of course I've been suggesting testing from the beginning, and I'm in favor of looking into this.
Well, I have a
And I think I have a better answer on your pooled question now that I understand it. they are individual test samples. They are run through like a bar-coded
Yes.
system, so they're getting an individual result.
Gotcha. I wonder if they have thought about pool testing and if they have the capability
Yeah,
to
I
do
think
that.
that's a very good question Sherry's asking, and I think that, yeah, if you could ask him that, because it
Because that
definitely
would make everybody's lives move more efficiently.
Right. I think people know, and I don't know the individual, maybe some of you just in the area, I believe they have a school board member who is a virologist for Loyola Hospital,
Gotcha.
who was able to kind of, get the process going for them, so.
That makes sense. Yeah. No, I give them, lots of credit for even trying to engage in this. And having a science lab, though, is an amazing thing. It really is. And our teachers, many of our teachers are trained in lab techniques, so it'd be interesting to know about their staff too. And I know they have Loyola lab assistants, but it'd be neat to see if their teachers are helping with that.
I know their school nurse is helping, but I think she's helping with a lot of the organizational details. I think there's a good number of staff involved in the saliva collection process.
Right.
Some grade levels, and I think it's the younger children, they are sending the vial, it's called something different than a vial, I don't know the right word right now, home, so that those kids are coming with their saliva sample to school. They actually
Gotcha.
found that for some children, I think it's their younger children, it's a little harder than you'd think to get a sample.
Totally is, yeah.
Yeah.
Those vials are very small. Yeah. Thank you.
So I guess I had one question. What is their participation rate?
High, like I want to say 85 to 90%. It's not 100, but it's high. I mean, I think they'd like it to be 100, but there are people, you do consent, you do sign a waiver to allow the school district to collect this information. So there are just some people that are not comfortable with that, and there are some people that have opted out, and that's certainly an option.
So of the two that you said that were clinically significant, did they turn into be positive cases? or
Yes.
they
So
didn't?
they do feel strongly and clear that their clinically significant findings are COVID findings. I think it's kind of I'll say technicality. They can't call it that because they're not an FDA approved lab. It's because their lab setting is.
Well, and seeing that's, and I guess, I agree testing is very important. That's where I really, my concern is that the tests have been, depending on the test, they're not necessarily, there's like false positives either direction. And so I'm just concerned that this is not FDA approved, because that does carry a lot of weight in the medical community.
Yeah. I think it might be FDA, the lab is not an FDA approved lab.
And that's the key thing. It's just like,
Well, I'm sorry. Go ahead, David.
no, that's the key operative, because you can take samples, but if you don't run samples in a proper lab, those things, you generally have to get those done verified. And so that's why I was wondering. So those two cases, did they go out and get another test at like a CVS or something that went through like a FDA approved lab, a clinical lab, and did they come back positive as well?
So what they did share is that their clinically significant findings in their non-FDA approved lab setting were accurately identified as COVID.
Okay.
And again, if we had that clinically significant finding for a school district, you'd have enough to say, you need to go home and quarantine. And yes, it would be good to verify that in a formal lab through a formal test, but you kind of have the information you need and saying, we need to address this as if it is COVID. Now, as you know, like even talking with our leadership team, I think one of the interesting things that came up was sort of the opposite, where the kids that we are sending home right now for the single symptom could be COVID illnesses, which as we know in little children is a stomach ache, is vomiting, is a headache, is a cough, is a runny nose. There are children that we are saying have to go home for 10 to 14 days until they can either get an alternative diagnosis or a negative COVID test. So we have children, and I won't say missing school because they're shifting to remote learning. But in some ways, I think what the principals were talking about earlier today was the more valuable thing is to be told that it's not COVID.
Yes, absolutely.
So you can continue on with business as usual,
Right, I
as
think
opposed to
that's
the understanding it's COVID.
Right, that's a
And
good
it's
point.
my understanding that, like I was saying, that many of these rapid test result places will not take a child who is symptomatic in one area, especially if it's not a fever, or if they have no known contacts. They will not accept them if they're under 12. So you'd have to go to one of the state locations, which are few and far between, and take 4 to 6 days or a week or whatever. So,
I think it's just a quick comment on David's point. I guess my prior is a little bit different on the FDA. I don't have any sort of expectation that a lab that is set up properly, that's not one of the FDA-approved labs, would be worse than one that is. That'd just be my expectation based on everything I've read about how the FDA has handled this pandemic to date. And the other comment I'd make on that is, the sensitivity of a test that you don't take. People talk about the sensitivity of the Pcr test, for example. The sensitivity of a test that you don't take today is 0, okay? So even having an imperfect test in an imperfect lab, and I'm not saying it is, I'm sure it's just as good as anything else, is better than nothing. One problem with the PCR test is that they tend to be overly sensitive,
Yeah.
and as we know, which is to say that the PCR test will pick up fragments of the RNA long after you've cleared the virus and are no longer infectious. So what we'd expect to see is we'd be picking up cases of people that are not infectious and saying you got to quarantine. But maybe that's worth it, in the
Yeah.
sense like, okay, so we got to quarantine some more people as opposed to not knowing. So
Well,
Yeah.
I would just want to comment on that, specifically the FDA approved. I mean, how they run the test, I'm not going to go down that, but when a lab is FDA approved, they have to follow certain protocols, and they have to serve certain things in place. And so I'm obviously not an expert on that, but I do know enough that if the protocols aren't followed, then they're not approved. And so to say an FDA approved lab means it sort of has that stamp of approval, but if it's not FDA approved, what protocols aren't they following that they didn't get that approval?
well,
And so that's my question.
have they tried to get FDA approval? Because in my opinion, I've worked in university laboratories for professors and at the University of Illinois. And for me, I guess the question would be about their technique. Is their technique viable? And do the people there, are they trained? Do they know what they're doing? Have they tried to get FDA approval, and how does that work?
Right, I think that's, and I don't have the answer to that.
Right.
What I would tell you is it felt informal because we were in a classroom in a public school building. But the lab assistants were from Loyola. I would assume their technique is good. Their collection devices were sterile. They had a carefully barcoded and confidentially identifiable, system. So what I was interpreting is it's the setting. It's not how you might think a laboratory should look, right? It's their science center, which is, if you've ever been to District 102 Science Center, I'd never been. It's there's fish tanks and there's bird cages, and it's a really charming place. You can see how the students would love being in there, but the students are not in there while it's being run as their testing lab. But I think it's probably just they don't have some of the formality, whether, I think the samples are being run through a PCR is they heat it, right? I mean, it's a kind of a hot plate cooker for total layman's version of this. But yeah, I don't know if they're pursuing that or not. I could find out if that felt to be an important element of consideration.
Yeah, it'd be interesting because because it's an elementary district, is that correct?
Yes.
I wonder, some of the high school districts actually have more sophisticated microbiology settings. Like when I used to teach, we'd have a separate hood for different things, and I wonder if they've tried to partner with a building, maybe not their own, even a local health institution that they could use if the FDA was concerned about that. But yeah, that would be something I'd like to learn about.
Just to be clear, you're referring to Loyola Hospital, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And obviously, it sounds like there's interest here. If we come back with a proposal on that, I would definitely be interested to see the financial implications as well. Jim in particular, I think there's been some charts and diagrams you've shown for us about where we're at in regards to after we've spent the money on the school upgrades that were just recently completed or pretty close to being completed. If we have something along those lines to show us where we're at and where our projections run out, if we were to implement a program or different options that are available or would be available, that would definitely be something of interest to the discussion as well.
Well, and it might not end up being $500,000 either with, depending on how the U of I's saliva testing that I think it was the Tribune just wrote a couple of days ago. It seems like they just got emergency FDA approval,
They did.
and it sounds like that's going pretty well. And I think they said that test's only like $5. So if that becomes more widely available, we could cut that cost in half, which
I
even
think
then, if
other
it's a
tests
quarter
are
million,
gonna
I still
come
think
down
$500,000
Exactly.
is intriguing
Yeah.
if it helps. But it could even go down over
I
time
totally
as,
agree.
as more
Yeah.
I
stuff
think,
goes.
I think there'd be,
But
when
I
you
Or
said
if we
that-
could get other
We
districts
got-
to
But the
participate.
thing is, I read that as well, but that $11 is the cost of the test, but that includes other costs, the lab techs, the overhead. So,
I believe that's an all-in cost.
That's their
right?
all in. Like,
I
I think their
understand that, but I'm
test
just
is like
talking
five, they would guess it to be about $5.
I got the impression from that article that it was $5 for the
Just
test.
for the
cost
test,
of the
not the-
test, not
okay.
the overhead.
Not the net cost,
It's not the
okay.
administrator.
Yeah, maybe we could get others to join us to help spread the cost.
Actually, they've offered it to a couple neighboring districts, and what's clear, right, is that more people in, more lab assistants needed, maybe even another PCR machine needed. So I think they've tried to do a pretty good analysis of no effort to make any money, but just how do you meet costs? And if we bring in another, 1,500 tests or 1,700 or 2,000, when we looked at our all staff, if you take everybody, every custodian, every lunch person, those numbers, I know, Jim, we looked at that today, and I think we were using a factor of 243 employees potentially, and about 1,100 hybrid students. I mean, you wouldn't test your remote students unless
Right.
students were interested in coming back.
Right.
I have heard that there's some state level discussion about the U of I testing being made available to public school districts in Illinois somehow. The board knows that I had looked into another option of another private company, and the cost there were, I think, was $125 per test per person for a PCR test, and for an antigen test, it was about $25 per test per person. So, I'm intrigued that some of the board is finding the $11 as, like you said, intriguing or interesting enough to say let's pursue this to some greater level. And I can certainly continue to speak through. And I will say that the state superintendent's organization has really tried to sort of keep people informed about what's going on with this. I mean, this is a public school matter that matters to also the school districts that have not yet opened for in-person learning. So there's a lot to this one. I know, we've talked about it. We're all waiting for the day when we can buy the dollar test at Walgreens, right? So, and feel like we get a reliable result, and we're just not there. So, I know Sherry and Jeff, you've said you'd be intrigued, and the cost makes some sense in comparison to other things we
I
might
think
be
there's other
spending
things we
money
can
on.
cut from the budget.
Yeah.
I also,
Well, something else to consider, though, and we're talking about 500 as it would be a set fixed number, when something to consider is that if we're talking about, it's definitely would be a great thing. It would be great to have that information. At the semester, would it inspire confidence from folks who are doing remote currently to then go in hybrid mode, and then you have an increased cost of testing. Again, those are great things to have more kids in school, more kids inspired to do the hybrid test, but that does increase the cost.
I think that's, for me, that's okay. That's why I would love,
Well,
I'm not a
think
pool
there's-
testing expert by any means, but it'd be really neat to see if pool testing would reduce the cost, or if that's, maybe it's not possible, I have no idea. But that would be interesting to know. So if you could ask them if that makes any sense, or if it's not feasible, then
I
we're
think
at the $11. but-
some projections, of where that might take us definitely would be good to see. But also something, again, and I hate to be the downer here, but if we're talking about one school year, and there's no guarantee we are through this by the start of the next school year. So if we start testing now, what contingencies are there if we have to continue this into the next school year? And again, how do those costs start impacting what we have in the bank at present?
Yeah, I have to say, I'm probably, I think on one end of being fiscally conservative on this board. And I've, argued against certain projects that I don't think are money well spent. So I don't lightly sort of say, let's spend money.
Yeah.
But this is an area where I think there could be real value. And again, there are many projects that we pursue which I think are dubious in terms of student impacts. And this is one I think that could have an impact. Again, I'm not saying it will. I'm saying there are other possibilities we should explore. But I think that this could be money well spent. And so, as I said before, there are projects that are coming up that we're going to be talking about in a few weeks. Very expensive projects. We should look at those and say, hey, how do these compare to, possibly increasing the knowledge about, the virus in our community and our schools and all the rest. So there's a trade-offs we have to talk about, but I wouldn't dismiss this out of hand.
No,
When Jeff said spend money. No, but the correlation with the parking lot, I think is, that's like the best analogy there, like
Absolutely.
testing, parking lot. Like, okay, we
But
can push
didn't-
parking
didn't-
lot
we
down the
didn't-
road.
We didn't approve $500,000 for parking lot, and we've actually pushed
We
back on that.
have many times.
Let's keep things in perspective. I agree, I guess.
Even if the parking lot was only 100,000, we don't need a parking lot right now.
Right, no, I get that. I guess where I'm coming from is the price. I'm for the idea of testing, and the price is high. My concern is the accuracy and the quality of the test. That's my concern. I don't want to be going down, spending $500,000 on something that we're not necessarily going to get good accuracy on, and that's my concern. So that's why I could be persuaded to that, but I need to make sure that need to know that this is going to be, we're not going to be getting a ton of false positives, that this will actually move that needle to make the school safer.
Yeah, for sure.
I know we've talked, in the past about whatever matters it may be, that if the majority of the board would like more information, it sounds like investigating, understanding the pool testing, the possibility of FDA approval, where the U of I testing may be in terms of public school access, and the financial projections would all be next pieces to consider, again, if sort of the board majority would like to sort of continue the exploration.
Yeah,
I would.
I would.
Yeah, I think it's.
I'd like more information, yeah. That's.
All right.
Sounds like we'd like more information.
I will work on that. So thank you for the feedback. The other piece, and again, it was not arranged this way on purpose by any means, but I did want to talk about school reopening and the COVID testing, and also Facilities Advisory Committee, kind of to the point of the parking lot, that Linda Murphy and Joel Marhul joined me for a meeting, and I have attached the agenda there. I want to say it was last week. It was September 10th. I think that was just last week, was it? Or the week before? And really it was, to me, the meeting felt like intentionally, and I'm the one that set it up, was to sort of get back on track. And I don't know that we were ever off track, but certainly we were in the midst of this major construction project, that we have other projects, both in terms of maintenance and capital, that have been part of conversations. Yes, the Blythe Park parking lot is one of those. That I just want to share the agenda, and Joel or Linda, or maybe you want to just elaborate a little bit, but I know we've always wanted to make sure that we're bringing to the full board the agenda and some details of the discussion that we had in committee. Joel, do you want to?
Sure.
Completely behind me there.
I'm going to jump back to the testing for a moment, since I clearly didn't say anything. I think it's worth pursuing. I think we need to make sure that we go in with eyes wide open and consider, do we have the ability to do the frequency of testing that's necessary, and do we run the risk of people getting complacent with so-called negative results and then losing the good behaviors that we're developing right now. Testing is one element of this, but if we're going to lose out on good behavior or cause people to become lax in their social distancing standards, then we need to consider that too. And like I said, I'm fully in favor of exploring it, but I think we need to make sure that we're also not creating a monster that we can't stop, and that is testing forever and ever. Off that soapbox, with regards to long-range planning, we spoke to the kind of a report that Jeff had kind of initiated, which was where did we start with these projects in terms of the original conception, and then where did we end up, and then how did we get there, and what were the changes along the way that caused these projects to go from, some people had assumed, just an Ames level renovation to touching something at all 4 schools. And there were multiple decisions along the way, including school safety and additional opportunities to separate play and parking, for example, at Hollywood, and just space reallocation as we thought about this. But that's still been requested. It's not supposed to be a research paper, but certainly a summary, 1-page type executive summary. Ribbon cuttings and celebrations we'd like to do something, whether it's just a limited group of people at Ames outside is something that's going to be considered. Tours are still open, as Martha has noted a number of times, for board members. I know Jeff and Sherry, I believe, were at some, and I have not, but everyone has the ability to take opportunity for an individual tour. We are going to be continuing to explore Hollywood and reaching out to the zoo and the village, and especially the village with regards to getting permits and approvals, and so that's able to move forward now that we have some form of agreement with HCA, and actually there will probably be an opportunity for people to do some kind of playground committee there as well. We will be looking at Central and Hauser again, and the consultants have been advised to reach out to the Village of Riverside and see what the comments there are. There's a very rough cost estimate that Ramesh has started working on, so we'll get that estimate should probably go with the presentation at the October COW. And then Ramesh mentioned the central sprinkler system, which is really merely a testing adventure, and then to see what the results of that testing are and what other elements of the system need to be replaced. And finally, we are in this room, which has a relatively aged audio and light system, and we've directed the architect to start looking at various options. There is a wish list out there with regards to what the performance space perhaps could be, but then also, as Jeff would appreciate, looking at what we really truly need. With it being noted that much of the equipment is pretty old and parts are becoming hard to come by. Linda, was there anything else you wanted to add?
No, it was just, it felt like pretty much a meeting of just checking back on each of them, because it had been several months since we had talked, so kind of checking back. We are in a new financial situation, so I think we need to look at it through that lens as well, revisit things, and I think the committee heard the board with some of those things, so I don't think a $500,000 parking lot is going to be proposed. I mean, nothing's going to, I mean, we're not there yet, but I think that's been heard loud and clear, so just so you know, the committee is very aware of that, and I think we will be pursuing, these ventures over the next several years in a cost-efficient and effective way, because as we're talking about, we're in a different situation at the moment. So that's what I took from it. It felt like more of a just, let's revisit. Are we still looking at where were we? It's been 6 months since we talked about it. So that's kind of what the meeting was. And I anticipate we'll probably be meeting again soon. I think we kind of left the last meeting unsure exactly where we left the Hauser Central thing, so I think we reached back out. I'm not sure an October 7th COW is really realistic, because I think there was a lot of questions that we had left that we needed to go back and get answered, costs. So I would anticipate personally that should be a little bit later, because I think we need to check back in before it's presented to the board, because I don't think it's personally in a place that's ready for presentation. But that's just my opinion.
I think Linda's correct in that, is that we're continuing that process, but
Yeah.
it's not anywhere where it's
completely vetted.
Yeah. I don't think
or-
there's any sort of plan where like, here it is and here's what we want to do. I think we are like 100 miles away from that at the moment. So I personally think before we want to bring it to the board, we want to get a little bit closer, want to be within 5 miles maybe. So that's what I took from the meeting.
Pure curiosity on the parking situation for Hollywood. So I think last I heard that zoo talks were still kind of ongoing, but sounded positive. So with the zoo to the village, is that really, are we kind of looking at that initial hypothetical combination of some spots on the zoo and then just some spots on the street, and that would be sufficient for what we need? That actually seems reasonable where we're at today.
That seems reasonable, based on the feedback we received from the village and the
Nice.
zoo.
And again, I think the meeting almost was like revisiting, like, okay, that's where we were, now we need to pick back up because we haven't, so those conversations need to be reinitiated.
Yeah, kickstart everything.
So that's pretty much what the meeting felt like to me, was like, we need to start reinitiating, because we had we're in the middle of a pandemic, things got kind of,
Yep, put it
you
on
know,
pause and.
and now it's like, let's reinitiate, but also under this new lens of where we are and making sure, I personally don't want to bring a presentation to the board that's just going to be like unrealistic. So I think that's where we're at. But yes, and that one specifically, I think it was just, yes, we need to reinitiate those conversations and make sure.
I like your term initially hypothetically, Wesley. That's what we were doing is, I thought it was
One
kind of
of 10 different
reset,
options
right?
we brainstormed or something like that, so.
Yeah, or a restart where things have been on pause. And we don't want to lose sight of it, and yet we know we're still, managing through a public health crisis, and we know we will be for the foreseeable future. So but I do appreciate keeping those conversations. I don't want them to just sort of stop. We have some goals and some big ideas, and even if things have to wait, I'd want it to be sort of a purposeful, let's pause or let's wait on things too.
I agree with that. I mean, a lot of these conversations were started pre-pandemic, so I think it's worth the time to rethink through things and make sure what's finally being presented to the board is an actionable idea or a series of plans that we could either plan for in the future or
So those are all my items from the superintendent's report, and
That was a long report.
sorry. 3 items, I didn't think it would be that long. No, it was a
It's
good
all
conversation, I appreciate
Very
it.
important.
Definitely a good conversation.
Yeah.
Okay, next is the consent agenda. Can the board secretary read tonight's consent agenda?
Yes, sir. Tonight's consent agenda consists of meeting minutes from the August 5th, 2020 special board meeting, from the regular business meeting on August 19th, 2020, the closed session from same day, August 19th, 2020, the personnel report as presented here, the EAB agreement, which to highlight is a third-party vendor that we use for district leadership purposes, the EIS administrator and teacher salary and benefits report, payables pre-list of August 31st, 2020, and payables pre-list for September 16th, 2020. And that is everything on the consent agenda.
All right, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
So moved.
Is there any discussion or any items to be removed? All right, if not, Kathy, can you call the roll?
Okay, Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Barsadi?
Aye.
Mr. Muirhead?
Aye.
Mrs. Murphy? Aye. Mr. Marhol?
Aye.
Mrs. Kleiber? Aye. And Mr. Hunt?
Aye.
Okay, motion passes.
And I'll just add, there's always important things that are on those reports, but one thing is the remote learning coaches that were recommended. So we do have 5 of our District 96 teachers who will be receiving that additional stipend to support our classroom teachers in improving their practices with remote learning. And that involves the classroom teachers that are teaching hybrid that are also teaching some remote, and when they've had more children now in remote because of quarantine. So we just feel like this is a great support to peer-to-peer support. So thank you for that, and thank you for the approval on all those items, but that's the one worth highlighting.
Okay, next on the agenda is the Riverside Education Council. I don't think we have any members present tonight, although they've asked for a statement to be read. So I have that statement in front of me. I will go ahead and read it then. And it begins, good evening. The Riverside Education Council would like to thank the board and administration for everything they've done to prepare for this school year. Navigating return to learn in our new COVID world is a huge endeavor. After the most recent positive case, District 96 administration began sharing building locations of members of our community who have tested positive. We would like to share that the Riverside Education Council is very appreciative that the building locations of positive cases are now being shared with members of the District 96 community. We understand that the confidentiality of a positive case or people needing to quarantine is of utmost importance, but knowing the location of a positive case is important in the eyes of the REC members. There are many laws and guidelines related to COVID-19. We would like to inquire about some of the Illinois Department of Public Health guidelines related to COVID exposure. Could the school district apply guidelines or enact recommendations that are more stringent than those proposed by the IDPH? The IDPH guidelines state a close contact of a positive case is asked to quarantine, but not required to have a COVID test. If the district cannot mandate testing for someone quarantined as a close contact, can it be strongly recommended? If the person in quarantine never had symptoms, could the district offer a recommendation that one get a test in the last few days of quarantine as an added precaution before returning to in-person teaching or learning? According to IDPH guidelines, if a family member is in quarantine as a precaution due to close contact, staff members or students in the home can still come to work in school, I should say. Can the district highly recommend that anyone living in a home with someone who is required to quarantine due to close contact refrain from entering the building for work or school? While it is possible that many of the above cannot be mandated, perhaps they can be highly recommended by our school district. We believe that encouraging these extra levels of caution, particularly if people heed this warning, will allow us to keep District 96 students and staff safe. We thank you for your consideration of these topics as you continue your discussions related to District 96 COVID-19 procedures. Sincerely, Katie Cayesta and Jen Ullman, the Riverside Education Council co-presidents. I think, Martha, we're going to take that under advisement.
Absolutely. So thank you for sharing that.
All right. Next on the agenda is board member comments.
Oh, I have just one. It probably goes out to Angela Dilzel, who was talking to us about the Dreambox app. I just want to say that my second grader immediately took to it and really is engaged and, in her afternoon work. So it's a math app, and it's been really fun for her. And I just want to appreciate the time you spent. We've only been using it a little bit, but I appreciate that keeping a second grader's attention is a hard thing. So thank you for choosing something that's at least well organized and easy. It was immediately easy for her to implement. So thank you for that. Or John too, whoever did the work.
Linda and I took a tour of as Joel mentioned earlier, of the 4 buildings. Was it last week or the week before last? I can't remember exactly. But I was very impressed by all the work that had been done in all the buildings. Lots of, as we had hoped, there'd be lots of light and lots of open spaces, which was great. So appreciate the tour, and I was happy to see what they had done. My only caveat is that one thing I wish they had done differently, and I would hope we'd think about in the future, was apparently in the Blythe building and the Ames building, the windows are not operable. You can't open them, as we know. And that could be an issue. And even for, right now, like in the pandemic, it's like, okay, they have air conditioning or whatnot, but there's really no substitute for just having fresh air. So I would think in the future, I would hope that that's something future boards would consider carefully, the operability of windows. But otherwise, I thought it was really very well done, everything.
Yeah, I second Jeff. The tour was great. Second all of his comments, the windows, everything. But I will say, I am mostly familiar with Central because that's where my children went. And I literally gasped when I walked down there because it looked so different where the multipurpose room now is, where the district office and the previous classroom were. So it's quite remarkable. So if you haven't gone on the tour, you should. The space is just completely transformed.
I went in on the tour yesterday. Initially, Sherry was going to be with us, but she had to cancel at the last minute. But yeah, what's been said, I echo those statements. I did make note of some of the windows not working while others did, and it is a definitely hindsight is 2020 kind of moment when seeing that some don't work or won't work for that opening to bring in fresh air. That is a shame, but I don't want to dampen the rest of the project, which seems just truly amazing. And yeah, you know, Sherry, Linda, like you, I definitely noticed the difference of the basement of Central, just completely, incredibly changed. And I remember there was some discussion we had over time about the shrubs, and yes, it was sad to see them go, but seeing the light that's coming in down to that space now, it makes it so much more usable, so much more just bright, and really looks like a place that's used, that could be used for learning and used for kids, and just, you know, not, whereas before it was kind of very dark and dank and depressing, and much like a rabbit warren back in the this district office location. So it's great to see all that, how much that's been improved. You know, another thing I'll note in Central is where they had the ramping on the first floor, whereas it seemed like every 2 feet in Central you were turning to run into a step up or a step down of one sort. So it's glad to see that those have been taken out. It just seems to be so much more accessible, so much more usable, and just, you know, modern and up to date. There is definitely something to be said for bringing a little bit of update to some of these buildings that, as classic as they are, could use a little bit of updating from time to time. So I'm definitely thinking that the investment we made was a wise one.
I can't wait to actually see the kids in there.
Yes.
I can't wait for like a year
That's
from
too
now.
bad. I know.
Where you can see the spaces actually
Yeah.
being used for what they were purposed for.
Intended, yeah.
Yeah, like
So I think the careful planning for that central lower level multi-purpose room, as we know, one of the ideas was for children to eat lunch, and we wanted 196 children to be able to eat in that
Yeah.
space,
Right.
and we figured out very specifically shoulder to shoulder, you know, eating for children. And
Yeah. So while this tour was great, I can't wait for next year's tour.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, to separate that Hauser and Central lunch is, whenever they actually use it, is going to transform not only the Hauser day for those kids that don't have to eat at 10 in the morning, but
Right,
the little
right.
ones who feel like they have their own space as well. I know it's fun to peek at the junior high level, but to have their own time is amazing. So I'm really happy that we were able to do that.
And it
Tell
was
you, the
just,
only thing I was kind of regretting when we were down there is, you know, looking at the floor, I'm like, you know, they should have like put an outline where the pool was. Maybe like painted water on the floor or something.
Left
Yeah,
some of the
exactly.
tile.
Let people know what was there before.
Ooh, we could have done a tile mosaic or something on the wall. That'd be neat.
and for
I
me,
guess,
oh,
go ahead.
go ahead.
Well, just something else I should note too. It was pretty amazing, dang near miraculous that, you know, seeing some of these things that we'd seen computer models of and reviewed and seen the changes of over time actually come to life and look pretty much like what we had seen in the models. That, I don't know, my previous experience in anything like that, what you see on the drawings kind of has a vague, hail, you know, kind of a resemblance to what you see in the final product. But I remember at one point on the Ames tour, I suddenly run into some steps that were painted like grass, and I'm like, I remember that.
Yeah. I was just excited also to see the color, and that as we, hopefully we have like a template that as we just have to go through necessary painting of rooms over the course of the next 10 years, those colors can be then brought throughout the building, because it really just felt like such, the energy just from the color, it was great. So I'm excited for that to be even carried out further as we do normal maintenance.
Any other board member comments?
I had a couple things I want to throw out. So I'll just say, agree, it looks great. And then another big thank you. I know a couple people, I think at least one person, maybe two people said this earlier too, but you know, just another huge thank you to everybody that was part of the planning, everybody in the staff that is now executing. Last meeting was day one, so now that we're 2 weeks beyond that, just the continued effort that everybody's putting into it is just amazing to see, and just having the opportunity to talk to a handful of people at Ames, like staff at Ames, there seems to be good energy there. People are happy to be back and have a little bit of normalcy, even though it's not very normal. But just another huge thank you to everybody on the district staff side that was involved with and participating in the execution of everything that we've done. I think on a couple things, I wanted to call out a little bit specific, separately from what I knew was going to be the conversation earlier. But, and obviously I didn't know the REC comments were coming in, so this may sound a little contradictory to that. But one thing I wanted to throw out was our quarantine processes actually, and just making sure that we're remaining diligent and reviewing those so that we are not over quarantining people, because it is very disruptive to families and students going in school, out of school. So just making sure that we are appropriately quarantining and not just sending a bunch of people home because we feel like that's easier than following the actual protocol that's recommended. So hopefully some of the conversation we had earlier would help with that. But I think anything we could do to put more written protocols out there for families to understand, because I know there was a bit of I'll just call it a freak out a little bit when the first one happened, and there wasn't a lot of publicly available information on it that may or may not have helped. I don't know, but I know it's difficult to say each situation because every situation is going to be a little bit different, but anything even like some sort of decision tree or something that allows parents like, okay, my child's quarantined, what do I do? And like, here's kind of a generic overview that could always be updated, I think would be helpful, even for those not impacted by it. And the last thing I want to say is Mr. Gierman, principal at Ames, had sent an email out to the Ames family community about the playground is very lovely, as you guys that have done the tours have seen, and a lot of people are out enjoying it, and a lot of people are enjoying it without masks on. So I would just ask that we mask up if kids are going to be playing next to each other, just as that extra precaution. Like Joel said earlier, we don't want people getting lax and some of those behaviors that we've been putting into place getting pulled back, and now all of a sudden we're in a different position. So I'd just like to employ the community in being appropriate when you're not able to social distance with your kids and stuff like that, even while you're outside. Just it would help.
All right. Definitely good points to be made. Any further board member comments?
I just had one is, maybe for Pam Shaw or the nursing staff, that maybe could we have something on our website, I don't know if this is possible, for parents to have some access to where can their child be tested, because like pediatricians actually don't necessarily know. And it would be really neat just because they might have an idea locally better than even some of their doctors about where to go, because children have different requirements and different rules than someone who's an adult would have. That would be really useful.
We're not getting much information from IDPH, to be honest.
Okay.
So we're trying to get information as we find it from others who've collected it.
Great.
And IDPH guidance is changing every day.
Oh,
So
gosh.
to your point, there is a decision tree on the website now that was just updated last week from IDPH that shows that process for decision making.
I think that was deciding whether somebody needed to quarantine though, right?
It's the isolation
Now there's
exclusion.
a flow chart as well.
Okay, all right, maybe, okay, I'll go look at it.
They added that flow chart.
Okay, because the last one I saw was just what, I either have symptoms, I don't have, it was like the 5 decisions of whether you needed to quarantine, but I was saying more of, once you decided you need to quarantine, then what do you do? Like, what does that look like from it has that on there? Okay.
That I think may have some.
Okay, I'll take a look at it.
And Wesley, I know from some of our conversations that it's also about the accessing learning, right? So I know I
Yeah.
said in my parent letter, if your child's going to need to quarantine, you'll hear from the principal or the classroom teacher. And I know this was a challenging area, especially when it happened very early into the first few days of school. So Angela and I have talked about that. And again, it is a bit case by case. I know there was an assumption that teachers, if they're in a classroom where a child may have tested or demonstrated positive COVID, or we learned about the positive COVID symptoms, results, that the teacher would be on quarantine. Not necessarily. If the teacher had been able to consistently be more than 6 feet away, the teacher doesn't necessarily quarantine. So how children then access their learning on quarantine days is a little bit different based on grade level, based on what the situation of the classroom. But we're working on how we can even get clearer with some of that, because I know those are upsetting moments, both for children and for parents and for staff. So,
Yeah. And by no means was that comment a criticism either. It was just a suggestion of, something I noticed and why we're going through this, so.
No, and Pam and the nurses, frankly, are doing an amazing job. They're having to trace on their own, which we'll be talking about later. But thank you, Pam. I know it's difficult dealing with state communications and trying to figure out how we fit in. The only suggestion I might have, just as a parent, is our entry for school and pickup. Often, in my experience, the children are standing for sometimes more than 15 minutes very close together to wait for their temperature check, and that's, I think, a gap that we could fill where either we space on the sidewalk someplace for them to know where to stand. Like I know Hauser has paws on the ground. We could be doing that for elementary students. They're standing very close together waiting to get their temperature taken and for their screening, their Raptor screening on the computer to come through. And I think, because we don't know who they're standing next to. We know who they're in the classroom next to, but we don't know who they're standing next to outside for 15 minutes. And if that's, I realize it's outside, but they're very close together. So I think we could just do a better job spacing them out. I think that would help everybody and kind of keep everybody as far apart as we could, just to give ourselves a chance. Thanks.
and I'll add that Little Red Roadrunners got added to the central
Awesome.
sidewalk yesterday, or I don't know if it was
Little Red
yesterday or today, but
Thank
you will find stenciled red Roadrunners now in
Great.
front of Central School.
Great, because we have a giant, I'll call it a narrowing there because of we talked about the tree roots and the fencing that's up, and it's a huge pool of parents as well, kindergarten parents and other parents, and it's really something I think we need to think about as we not only drop off but release. Do we need to consider more specific drop-off times for different students or classes, or just to create as small of a gathering as we can. It's a pretty large group every day, at least at Central. I don't know about the others, but thanks. Just a
I would
parent
agree
note.
with your comment about the testing stuff too, Sherry. That's very confusing. And I just recently learned that Walgreens and CVS will not test anyone under 12 years old.
No, they
Which
won't.
I didn't know that was a thing
They
until like
won't,
3
yeah.
days ago. So,
And those are the quick ones, which would be nice to
Yeah.
have.
and I've even heard people, various people that have been exposed and whatever, and a lot of people have been going through their hospital system or whatever their primary care, and all these doctors are handling things differently. And I even went out to the IDPH website, and I couldn't even figure it out. Like I was just super confused with it. So yeah, anything we do there for somebody that needs it in that moment, your mind's going in so many places.
For the parent,
Yeah.
just to give them some place to look would be helpful. And I thank you, Pam. I know it's crazy, so.
I think part of the issue too is we're getting our guidance from IDPH.
Right.
Well, right.
Changes, so.
And the
Yeah.
IDPH, actually, the main sites for the state are very far away. Champaign and Aurora and, Arlington Heights. So these
Yeah.
parents that work during the day are going to have a hard time if that's their only choice going out
Yeah.
there. And so, and I'm just saying anything we can do to keep everybody moving is good. Thanks.
Well, I mean, I do have to say, what is really, I know I've said this before, but what's extraordinarily frustrating is that we are trying to do something that the federal government and the state government
Right.
have grossly failed. on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that is just enormously frustrating because we keep trying to figure out what to do, how to do it best, and then no one gives us guidance.
Yeah.
And so
Right.
here we are, 7 of us, with a great leadership team, trying to do the best.
Yeah.
And we don't have any guidance from the government. And that just is infuriating.
Yeah, we shouldn't have to be doing that.
No, and imagine the
We shouldn't.
administrators trying to navigate with no guidance. I mean,
We shouldn't be having to talk about testing.
No.
We
Right.
sh-
No,
Yeah, exactly. But here we are.
but here we
We are.
Everybody vote.
All right.
Moving on to committee reports. I'm going to tell everybody else no more comments.
We're sorry.
Moving on to committee reports. First on the list is the Education Committee.
Okay, so I've encouraged anybody, they're always on the board book, if you want to check it out on the district website to see the presentations that were there. Ms. Dolzel, we had a few things that we talked about. Summer school, talked about Institute Day and what the teachers learned. The teachers, of course, are navigating not only their own anxiety, but student anxiety. They're learning about new technologies for remote learning, and they learned about how to do asynchronous and hybrid and streaming and all these things. So thank you to Angela and all the team that helped navigate that. But it was a busy little presentation because there's so much going on to start the school year. So check it out.
Okay.
I was just on, I don't know if it's in this topic or not, but I was kind of curious, I think we had just approved the Lexia core programming. Is that, I noticed it wasn't in the stuff yet. Is it just not rolled out yet? Or?
We start training on that the end of this month.
Gotcha, okay. I was curious because I had my son in the reading enrichment, I think is what it was called, which used the Lexia thing, and he loved it. And I kind of interacted with it a little bit. It's a pretty cool, and like Sherry made the Dreambox comment, I can't get my kids to stop playing it.
Well, I know it's because there's an arcade, which they
Yeah.
can turn.
But they got to do math to get their
That's why we
coins.
set the
So
timer. You get your 20 minutes and you're done.
yeah.
Whatever you got to do.
So far, they seem to be good programs, so I'm glad we
Yeah.
went forward with
Really
those.
do.
That's good to hear, definitely. All right, next then is facilities.
Martha already spoke, and I already spoke a fair amount about where we're going with facilities, and Linda as well. And I think one thing we may need to add to this is just to continue to look at the continuing operations and maintenance and some of those projects and how those fit with both keeping things in a state of good repair and also paying attention to those costs and really looking to see what is an appropriate expense.
I think that's a really important point you're raising, Joel, and can I make a sort of request on this, which is sort of in the scheme of things does not seem important, and I know I've talked about this a few times, but can I make a formal request to the Facilities Committee to give some thought to the landscaping element around our schools in terms of tree plantings and all the rest. I don't think we've given that a lot of attention over the 5 years I've been on the board, and I think it's something that, again, it's not a super high priority in the scheme of things, but still, nonetheless, it's one of those things that is important, I think. And so I just make a formal request that it's something that, we consider at some point.
It's very appropriate, especially as we look to using more of our outdoor facility during this environment.
I'll toss out, and not to put any other school's PTA in this position, but the president of the Ames PTA had actually reached out to me maybe I think it was maybe the first day of school, about potentially using some PTA money because they're not really allowed to do a lot of, or they're not going to be able to do a lot of stuff that they did spend their money on, and that they specifically asked, is there like some trees or plants or something that we could fill gaps in? So
That'd be great. Yeah.
I thought that was good because then we don't have to spend our money, and that's parents' money that the parents can feel good about their money going to that too. So just to toss that out.
I know Linda probably know more about this, having been on, being president of the Central PTO or involved in that. But I remember we, years ago, had money from the PTO just to help with the playground construction, not the landscaping, but the actual apparatus, I believe, like
Yeah, I
years and
think that
years
was
ago.
prior to me, but yeah.
Oh, that was part of you,
Yeah,
but,
that was a conversation, I think, even
yeah.
last year in PLT.
right.
PTA.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Presidents kind of just mentioned like,
Yeah.
that there was some, they would like to add something to it. So yeah, hopefully. We
Yeah,
have a
they're-
PLT meeting coming up next week, so.
Yeah, the PTOs are amazing, and they're really go-getters and really want to do what's right. Whether it's books, they're always willing to help.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll try to get some more information about that at the meeting and definitely,
That's
yeah.
great.
It's a great use of money.
Yeah.
All right. Next then is the Policy Committee.
I have an item down here, and then I'll save all my policy stuff for next month.
You say that a
I have
lot.
5 coming down, so.
Coming later.
We are greatly anticipating the arrival of that. All right, next then is the Personnel Committee.
Nothing on the personnel committee at this point, but side comment that I'll just slide in. It'll probably become its own committee at some point, but we might want to, talking about kickstarting conversations, we might want to find a time in maybe the next month or so to revisit the strategy planning, long-term strategy planning, just so that doesn't get drug out too much longer. Because while we're still messing with this, we still need to figure out what we're going to do 5 years from now too.
Okay. Next is the Finance Committee.
We just have one item on the new business, which is transferring $250,000 from working cash to the debt service fund to pay off the remainder, pay off our debt, which is almost, I think it's entirely paid off, I think, by, is it next year, by the end of this year? Is that right, or? 2 more years. And then transfer $750,000 from operations and maintenance to the capital projects for the kind of projects that Joel was mentioning earlier, which are routine maintenance that we do need to do on an annual basis.
Okay. And let's see, so the next item is old business. And we have a policy for discussion. Is there a motion to approve policy 760 residency as presented?
And I can-
moved. Second.
I'm sorry?
I'll just point out that there's 2 policy options presented there.
Right.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
There's two policy options presented. You'll see that we have the current policy, and then below that is the revision, and then below that is the another revision. The second is the second policy, the first revision that I would like to propose that we approve. I know I've spoke with some on that. That includes the paragraph, the separate paragraph specifically just addressing the 2021 school year. So the only change with this one is that additional paragraph that addresses the 2021 school year.
Okay, well, what's the best way to,
Is the other policy the one that we had previously
It's
seen?
right, it's very similar to that one.
yeah.
And I know that, are we allowed to discuss now? Because I don't know if we've made a motion.
I don't know that we've carried this through yet. No, so we'll try again.
And I interrupted the motion, so I'm sorry. Yeah,
Okay,
just to
well, so
clarify that.
is there a motion to approve the revised policy 670 residency, the middle option 1, I guess it's noted, as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Okay.
I know there was a conversation with legal about this, and the one that you are requesting that we approve, that the motion is that it's okay, like it's,
Right, legal wrote that, I didn't write that. So.
yes, okay, just making
Yeah.
sure.
You were
Because it
talking
does
about-
sound
I would
exactly
hope so.
like what we had said,
Right,
that
so
would be
basically
ideal.
we're leaving the old policy exactly as it
is,
was.
and
We're
just
adding
adding.
a separate line that says for the 2020, 2021 school year.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's much, much clearer than the first proposal, so I thank you for pursuing that.
Yeah, and as long as our lawyers have reviewed it and
Yeah.
okayed it, then I'm perfectly.
Am I allowed to ask a question, like just a clarification, or is that an appropriate time for the new second policy?
Sure.
I just wanted to know, are the teachers aware they may have to pay taxes on that? I just didn't know.
That's not what we're setting up.
Because it says tuition free. I didn't know if that was a factor. I didn't know.
They would, this will not be a taxable benefit to them. This is not set up that way.
Okay, it was just hard to understand just based on the language.
Okay.
It's
Is
not
there any-
taxable, okay.
I'm sorry, Sherry, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, I'm just trying to absorb what she said because it's the first, okay, so it's not taxable. How do we know that? I guess.
That's what this board is agreeing to through this policy revision. That's what this board would be agreeing to.
But do we have control over the taxes?
This is a policy pertaining to residency, and there's exceptions. There's going to be one exception that we're making to the residency policy
Right.
just for this year. So
I understand.
it's not.
It's not a
I think
personal.
that it's not.
That language is matching the first line,
Right.
which I think is why they put it in the second line as well, just so it's consistent would be my assumption, but we're not providing it as a benefit, quote
Okay.
unquote.
It's just a exception to the
Yeah.
residency policy.
I see
A
what you're-
waiver almost.
Yeah.
Is there any further discussion?
I'll just echo Jeff in that this is pulling out this 2020 to 2021 policy change is really smart, and the language that we received from council is pretty straightforward, and it's it gives us enough freedom to do what we want.
All right.
I guess I just have one, I spoke out before, but I won't be voting in favor of this, not because I don't, I totally appreciate the teachers and their families, and which is why I voted to delay in person just to begin with, just to make sure our rates were low. But I'm not sure I like the stretched interpretation of the statute here. So I totally appreciate what you guys are doing. I understand it, but I'm not sure that I agree with that stretch. So thanks.
Okay. Any further discussion?
Yep.
Are we ready to vote?
Yep.
All right. Kathy, can you call the roll?
Okay, Mr. Muirhead?
Aye.
Mr. Barsadi?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mrs. Murphy?
Aye.
Mr. Marhol?
Aye.
Mrs. Kleiber?
No?
Mr. Hunt?
Aye.
Okay, motion passes.
All right. Next is the new business discussion. And the first item listed is a resolution to transfer $750,000 from the operating and maintenance fund to the capital projects fund.
We budgeted to transfer $1 million, $250,000 from working cash to debt service. We've got about $1.1 million to pay November 1st, so I was hoping to get it approved by next month, have the treasurer transfer the money, we can make our payment, and then we'll have one more debt service payment next year, and that'll be the end of those debt certificates. Also, the $750,000 from capital projects, that really represents the money we budgeted last year to spend on maintenance projects that we didn't spend while we were in the middle of all the other capital projects. So we want to keep that money set aside to do work on our facilities. So we budgeted and just need to get it at least the 250 moved so we can make our payment.
So the 750 you mentioned is kind of a carryover, so it's not necessarily transferring money to pay like the last bills on the
No.
the current upgrade
No,
projects.
it would be for new projects.
Mhm.
And the idea is not to just let the fund balance accumulate again. This is money that, had we not been quite so busy with everything else, that should have taken care of some projects that were on our list.
Mhm. Any other questions? All right, thanks, Jim. All right, so the next item on the agenda is second public comment. Has there been any public comment coming in? All right, well then, if not, future meeting dates are October 7th, 2020, Committee of the Whole meeting, 7 p.m. listed here as Ames. Is that real?
So it's a cow meeting, and we did rotate cow, and I think we could meet in the multipurpose room there, the new multipurpose room, socially distant. So if we'd like to return to our cow building rotation, we did look at the spaces that we think are large enough at Ames, the multipurpose room at Life, I think it'd be the gymnasium at Central. I think we could meet at Central. We've never been able to meet at Central because it wasn't ADA accessible, but we could meet in the new multipurpose room there. And then Hollywood, the gymnasium, which we've done before. So unless this is just more comfortable for people, I know we've kind of figured out our social distancing here. I think we could address it in the other sites as well.
I personally would like to go.
I would like to see us use all of our facilities and continue to try and exude some sense of not normalcy, but paying attention to each of our facilities and also perhaps highlighting the new spaces.
Yeah, I'm totally fine with it. Could you just do me a favor and send me a reminder so I don't go to the wrong place? Because it's old hat here now, so, and my brain is a little
I'm a bit too
tired.
familiar here, hasn't
It's
it?
a little familiar, yeah.
Yeah.
Dave? Okay. Jeff?
I know it's wrong here, just that when COVID started, I don't think we've had anyone come to our meeting.
No.
And so it's all televised. I think people just observe it by television. So I don't know if it makes so much difference at this point in time, but I don't have a strong opinion about it.
I would only say one thing, that I do think I understand why we're set up this way. I would say it's very hard to have a meeting like this, maybe for the back row, not as much for the front row. I'm having a very difficult time with these meetings because I feel like I want to look when everybody's talking, and then it doesn't feel conducive to a meeting. It feels more like we're putting on a performance. Not that I don't think that this is,
Our town
appropriate.
school board
but
edition.
I would literally just be open to trying a new formation,
Configuration, yeah.
if that's in a new location or even in this location, simply because I do find it hard to.
Facing their direction.
Yeah, I feel like when Jeff talks, I'm like this, and then I have to turn and it just, I find it to be, I understand the situation we're in, but if looking forward to a new formation.
Yeah, we took a preliminary look at our larger spaces and having the new larger spaces. I mean, it'd be nice to go there, I think, and then they might even be better configurations. I mean, I think if we found that there's a
Right.
place that we like better, it could also become a
Right,
regular
that-
meeting space.
That's almost what I'm thinking, like, as we
Yeah.
go through them, maybe we find somewhere that's actually a better meeting space during a pandemic than a stage,
Yeah.
Right, although I
Setting.
will say, having people facing the same direction is safer than us
You're-
facing each other. That's why we have the students that way, so as long as it's a reasonable configuration.
Absolutely, yeah. Totally understand that.
All right, well, Wes?
You're
Joel?
wearing a mask, I'm good.
All right. Joel?
I said my piece.
Okay, fair enough. All right, oh, okay, so it sounds like that's real then. So we'll repeat myself here. So future meeting dates are October 7th, 2020, Committee of the Whole meeting at 7 p.m. in the Ames Multipurpose Room. October 21st, 2020, regular business meeting, 7 p.m. in the Hauser Auditorium. Board will enter into closed session at 6:30 if necessary, and return to open session at 7 p.m. There, jumped around again on me. I can't get to the end. Okay, and that's the only other one listed. All right, so if there is nothing else, this meeting is adjourned.